So I'm Jess Piasecki. I am a lecturer at Nottingham Trent University. I also do a bit of running, and I teamed up with Lucy and Georgie. I think it was like a few months ago now, but Georgie and I have sort of got to know each other both through running and work world, and we both sort of share a passion for female physiology, as it were, and spreading the word and raising awareness. And Georgie introduced me to Lucy, and we decided we would take it upon ourselves to try and launch this podcast. So we were lucky enough to get a small grant from the Physiological Society, which I was able to apply through work, and that sort of helped kickstart us allowed to like fund the equipment and things. It's not been too expensive or anything, but it just helped us. And then we sort of planned, which I think is quite a key aspect when doing podcasts, because Georgie and I tend to waffle on and Lucy keeps us in check. So we've started to plan, and then we recorded our first episode, and we've managed to do it actually all remotely as well. So I think through the podcast, for me personally, I just want to raise awareness and sort of enhance that communication amongst all females. We've called it the Female Athlete Podcast, but for me, a female athlete is anyone who's female and who exercises, and the majority of those will have some kind of like menstrual cycle, whether it's through an oral contraceptive or not, and they'll have their own stories and their own experiences. And if we can open up that conversation, then hopefully we can just keep more women in sport, really, and promote females competing at recreational right the way through elite level.
And we're going to come into areas or aspects of the menopause and puberty as well.
Yeah.
So I'm Georgie, Georgie Bruinvels. I work I'm an applied physiologist, I guess, and a research scientist, and I work for a company called Orico. Orico is a sports science and data analytics company that primarily and has historically worked in elite male sport. We've historically had some female clients, but they've very much been in their minority. More recently, so over the last, I guess, 2 years, probably since I started being a bit more demanding, we have launched like a female athlete program. It involves, or it has an app as part of it, so the Fitter Women app, which I know you've spoken about in the past. Jess is actually one of our ambassadors, but essentially my role at Orico is kind of multifactorial. So I do work with the male athletes from a physiology perspective, analysing blood biomarkers, helping to reduce risk of illness and injury. But I also spend a lot of my time now with our female clients, really helping each individual work with their menstrual cycle and work with the fluctuating hormones that occur through their menstrual cycle, or working with their physiology as a result of using hormonal contraception as well. And I guess like my real aim and passion, like very similar to Jess, is to like drive education, drive awareness, break down barriers across the board. And I think that was like a massive motivation for doing this. Like Jess and I were always finding that we were being asked to do education sessions, and we had this like grand plan of getting a bus and doing road shows around the country. But I think we just decided that a podcast was much easier. And then we met Lucy, and we just thought, actually, this is a way that we can really share as much information as possible. And I also run too.
And for me, as I've already mentioned, just met Georgie, and then Georgie introduced me to Jess. So from my perspective, I think as I studied sports journalism about 5 years ago, and then went into sports communications. And then I've kind of come freelance in the last kind of 7 or 8 months, and decided to go freelance to work on reporting and commentating, mainly for BBC Radio. So I do that, but I also run my own women's rugby channel, which is called Women's Rugby Hub. And I mostly do interviews when the leagues are obviously running. I go to the games and do post-match interviews, and I know quite a lot of the women's rugby, the players, quite well. So I've got an Instagram channel and kind of dedicate my time to to that and promoting that, and just getting the stories of the players out there, because obviously from a journalism perspective as well, you obviously see firsthand how little representation women's sport gets in comparison to men's. So that's another reason for kind of wanting to start the podcast, because it's so embarrassing how little research there is out there and how little female athletes actually know about their own bodies. And you get proper professional rugby players that actually don't wear like a proper sports bra because they don't know about it, and it's kind of laughable. So it's just, yeah, I think this is a great platform to be able to just talk about stuff and have a question time at the end for people to ask questions. And yeah, so I'm coming at it from a more journalistic perspective and help promote it on social media and do like little social clips and teasers and things. So yeah. Oh yeah, I'm doing a marathon in October if it happens.
Well, I guess it's not a topic that obviously people should be worried about talking about, but it is something that maybe there is not a stigma, but maybe a taboo, that people feel that they can't talk about it or they feel awkward. Is that what the podcast is about? Putting that information out there so that it's available and people don't have to ask the questions, you're answering the questions so that they don't almost have to ask them?
I think that's part of the reason for it. I really, really feel that a lot of the reasons why people don't want to talk about it and feel embarrassed to talk about it is because they don't really understand. And I think that's because the education that you might get in schools around this is relatively limited. Like some work I've done has found that like 82% of women have never been educated, exercising women have never been educated around their menstrual cycle. So if they don't understand, like they don't have the understanding about it, they don't know why they might feel as they do, like why are they going to suddenly start talking to their coach about it, or why are they going to talk to, I don't know, like other people about it if they feel almost embarrassed because they like are almost internalizing it. I think the other really interesting thing is that I think there's a large part of us as women who just think it's normal, and you think, okay, I'm a really heavy bleeder, like that's normal, or I experience loads of pain, well, it's my period, like that's just me. And I think because again we don't share that information, we don't know that that might be abnormal. Like one of my PhD studies was looking at the prevalence of heavy menstrual bleeding, and we found that because often there's a genetic component to it. You might speak to your mum about it, but your mum's likely to be a heavy bleeder as well. So you actually don't know that your situation is abnormal, and you're not likely to speak to your coach or your teacher or even your friends. Like you're not going to say, oh, I've got to, like, I need to use another Super Plus tampon. Like it just doesn't really work like that. I mean, maybe when you get older you might, but I think there really is this almost like shame factor to talking about that kind of thing. I know I was definitely that person when I was younger, and so I definitely think the education side is like so important to help break those taboos, really.
Yeah, I think following on from that, it's really important that we can provide some of those perhaps little queries that people might have as best as we can. We've always said throughout, the research underpins a lot of what we provide anyway, and that is an area that still is expanding at the moment. So, we're not saying everything we say is 100% like going to work for everybody. We just sort of go off what the research is saying at the minute. But I spoke to this about someone else yesterday, that I think the trajectory changes like with age. So when you're younger, I don't think you do have that understanding. So for young athletes particularly, this might help them just broaden their horizons a little bit, and like Georgie said, open their minds to the fact that their cases might not necessarily be the norm, or they might be experiencing some things that perhaps they could address in another manner, which they might not have thought about before because they didn't have that sort of education around the area. And I think that young sort of adolescent and sub-elite level is something that I'm quite passionate about, because it's most of the people in elite sport would probably be able to access this kinds of information through team physiologists or physios or mentors, coaches, and they've got to that level and have that basic understanding. Perhaps it's the people that are like the sub-elite level, coming through the ranks at club level, the coaches that are volunteering in an evening, you know, working with young girls will probably be, you know, thinking how best they can approach this topic, or what kind of sources could they point their athletes to. And if we can keep those females in sport and provide them with a bit of a platform to engage with, then, you know, hopefully we keep them in the sport for longer and keep, you know, females progressing from that recreational level right the way through to elite level. And you know, in years to come, who knows, we might have more females than males at the top level in sport, which would be amazing. But for me, that's sort of something that I'm quite passionate about. And when I do a lot of talks, it's normally to sort of club level athletes, and I think that sort of support network for them is really important.
I also think that as they mentioned, it's about normalizing the conversation, but I would say that the topics that we do talk about are considered taboo, and they are, like, periods especially. Like, I would never have talked to anyone really about my periods except for my friends. I wouldn't have spoken to my family about it. And I think that, but it's worth mentioning that we're not just doing stuff about the menstrual cycle, we're doing other topics. Like, next time we want to do contraception, we want to do perimenopause and menopause. So it's kind of like those topics that just don't really get talked about in the mainstream media. And if you need the information, you normally have to go looking for it and stuff. So yeah, I'd say it's definitely to do with opening up the conversation, but not just, we're trying not to just get pigeonholed into kind of the menstrual cycle, I think, as well.
I'm going to say just the last thing, very much like on Jess's point around their kind of sub-elite, like, youngsters. We also, as part of the study we did last year, we found that 39% of girls in the UK drop out of sport through their teenage years. And we know that women are dropping out of sport at twice the rate that, or girls are dropping out of sport at twice the rate of boys. And so, you know, even if we can just stop a handful of them by helping with understanding that actually, yeah, okay, when you go through puberty, your hips will widen, you will get breast development, you might not feel quite so athletic and good for a couple of years where your body goes through that adjustment, but just like helping girls to understand that that's normal, and actually that's really healthy to go through that. And we specifically found that the effects, like the physical effects of puberty, was one of the primary reasons for people stopping exercise.
How important, Jess, has your own experience been in being able to share information? I know that you've spoken openly and you shared your story with Athletics Weekly.
Yeah, so that's sort of one of the main drivers for me getting into research in the first place, through my own experiences. And then beyond that, like now sort of educating younger females and even working with athletes on a one-to-one basis is all based around, you know, my passion that developed. Like, I don't want anyone to go through what I went through in terms of athletics, and I want people to have a healthy, successful career. I'm not saying everyone has to go and run 2:25 for a marathon. It's whatever success is best for them. You know, it's important that they do that in a healthy manner, that they can enjoy the sport, whatever that sport is. So I think by just making, you know, my story available, and also through like the means of this podcast, we just again raise the awareness and the fact that, you know, I didn't know at a younger age that never having started a period, like from the ages of 12 to 18, like naturally was probably not a normal, well, it's definitely not a normal thing. And there were other things that could have been addressed perhaps at that time, but we didn't have that education. And I've said to a number of people, you know, if I had someone perhaps to talk to a little bit about it, you know, we were quite new to the sporting world, and particularly at that elite level, I didn't really know who to speak to or whatever, and my coach had never sort of experienced it either. So by having those kind of stories now, and I share that story with a lot of athletes whenever I do talks. So, you know, I did one last week virtually, and I've still had, you know, similar questions come through following that, saying, you know, what would I do to try and kickstart a period, or how should I be spreading my nutrition throughout the day, and all those kinds of things. You think they could be fairly obvious, but sometimes you just need someone else to tell you. And I think hopefully that's what I can provide, and just give that person reassurance that, okay, this is so important. If you address it now in like the shorter term period, your long-term health and long-term sort of longevity within the sport, whatever your sport is, will be a lot more paramount once you've addressed that situation about your menstrual cycle. So is definitely, you know, it always will be sort of a passion, and I hope I can sort of leave that legacy whenever I do sort of leave the sport. The fact that I've helped a few people along the way.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions you think you've all kind of come across in having launched this podcast and the conversations that you've had since? Are there any kind of topics or misconceptions that you felt really important to address?
Yeah, I think, I mean, funny enough, I actually did something yesterday where I got asked something very similar around like dispelling myths. My favorite recently, like, was based on what you can and can't do when you're menstruating. I had someone ask me if you can do a handstand when you're on your period, and for me, I was like, what? Like, I didn't even realize that people could possibly think that you couldn't. But I think there are like I guess my main myths would be around what you feel you can and can't do when you're menstruating, and I truly believe that if you manage your cycle well, so if you know how to look after yourself around your training, if you're eating well, if you're, obviously anxiety can really disrupt things, but if you're managing that as best you can, you're sleeping well, etc., there's no reason why you can't do anything at any time in your menstrual cycle. And that's like a massive passion of mine, to try and deliver that information. Obviously, if you've got an underlying menstrual dysfunction, things might be a bit different, but I think, a large like motivation as well for this podcast, I think, is to answer that kind of question, that actually, you know, your menstrual cycle shouldn't hold you back. You shouldn't be panicking if, you know, Lucy, if you're running a marathon when you're menstruating, like that shouldn't be something that should concern you, other than the like actual physical implications of having to wear sanitary products. But I guess most of the myths we would dispel would be around that. I think the other thing which we're going to come to in the next episode, or a couple of episodes time, is around hormonal contraception. I think a lot of people don't really understand hormonal contraception, the mechanism by which it works. I think a lot of people think that, I'm taking estrogen as a hormone, so that's great for my bone health. And again, like Jess can explain loads more about that, because that's one of her primary research focuses. But I think there's a lot of that kind of element that needs to be discussed.
Yeah, I think for me, I think it's just, I want to dispel, or people aren't really aware that the menstrual cycle is such a key cog in like the female machine. It can indicate, you know, that everything is normal, and how vital it is for bone health. If you don't have you don't accumulate the right bone health, then not only you're going to be predisposed to like bone fractures and injuries, but actually that will have a knock-on effect on your muscles as well. So it might not be that you're experiencing a number of bone stress injuries straight away, but you keep getting little tears in the tendons, little, you know, soft tissue injuries that can be attributed to low bone density. So I think for me, I'd like to dispel the myth that, you know, people, when they're sporty, it's okay to lose your period. You know, it's entirely not. We can still compete and run 100+ miles a week and have a period regularly, and it's so important that you do. Yes, it's a pain in the arse. Yes, we can't dictate like when our cycles are according to competitions, but you know, for long-term health and as well as your athletic health, I think for me, I just want to sort of dispel that myth that losing your period is normal, and giving people that understanding of how much impact it has on your wider sort of physiological systems when you don't have a period. So for me, that's my main sort of myth that I like to dispel.
Yeah, and I think as well, George, you mentioned it earlier, that a lot of women just think that whatever they're going through is normal. And actually, Georgie talks a lot, and just about how helping women to help themselves. So for instance, you know, we've been talking a lot about how you can alleviate your symptoms. So if you get really bad back pain, or you get, you know, cravings or bloating or lack of motivation, then actually just tracking it as well. Like that's something that I was introduced to by Georgie and Jess, is just tracking your menstrual cycle. Just the awareness of how you feel. So I think it's more kind of dispelling the myth that you can't do anything about it. It's just, you're just a woman and that's normal. So just get on with it. But actually you can help yourself quite a lot.
Great, thank you. And I think that's something that I took definitely from having used the Fit Woman app, is just how you can, you know, use it to your advantage as well. It shouldn't be seen as a disadvantage. There are things that you can do, and you can use it really to help yourself.
Yeah, that's like, I'm so glad you feel like that, because that's like the primary aim. Like, actually your menstrual cycle should be your advantage. It shows that your body is in an adaptive state, as Jess was saying. So actually you are, by having a regular period, you're able to respond well to your training, but also you can take control of it. Like, how can, as Lucy said, how can we help women help themselves? Like, how can we help you own your hormones and ride the waves, as opposed to fighting against them?
Yeah, I think some of the questions we get are quite surprising, aren't they? Like, I think someone mentioned, messaged in to say they're 34 years old and they're not, you know, what we've given them in the first couple of episodes is new knowledge to them. You know, it's enhanced their understanding already. And for someone to say that, and you think, oh, by the time you're sort of mid-30s, you might have a grasp on the whole period situation. But it's quite surprising that the lack of understanding that can be there. So you know, it's nice to hear that kind of thing, that we've actually helped someone, or just given them some basic knowledge that they might not have had before.
And I know that the latest episode is on stress. So have you found it important to kind of really look at some of the other factors that, you know, that can have an impact on things that you might not ordinarily think about, stress being one of them?
100%. So if you think about, like, for a happy, healthy menstrual cycle, a lot of people just think, oh, if you don't eat enough, then your menstrual cycle might stop. But increasingly, we're really understanding that there's a whole range of different things that contribute to the functioning of that axis, so that system. So nutrition, not just like how much you eat, but when you eat and what you eat. Also psychological anxiety, obviously with COVID-19 at the moment. People are working from home more, people are juggling children more, people have that one exercise token, like how can they use that wisely, and oh my gosh, shouldn't they be being so productive right now, and their sleep's all over the place because they're stressed about the situation. So like, anxiety is real, and like, I am seeing that so much in the athletes I work with at the moment, like increased levels of anxiety, changing menstrual characteristics, you know, more regular cycles, more symptoms. So that's a massive factor. Training load also can really influence the regularity of the menstrual cycle, the severity of symptoms. So suddenly increasing training load, or suddenly decreasing training load, or just changing it. We also know things like sleep and travel can also have an impact. So there's like actually a whole range of different things that contribute to that, like, system functioning healthy, I guess.
Yeah, and I think given the whole situation that everybody's in at the moment, they, like Georgie says, they may be experiencing some of those changes to their norm, and they might not actually realise that the stress that they're under, you know, because sometimes stress can not be as visual. You know, if I'm stressed, I tend to make it known, but some people don't do that, and they might not sort of realise that this whole sort of change in routine is quite stressful for their mind and their body, and that it could have an effect on their cycles, and disrupt things in one way or another. So I think we have to obviously acknowledge the current climate and how everyone's dealing with it to make it relevant, but also bring it to people's awareness that can too have an effect on the menstrual cycle. Even if, you know, you feel quite calm, you know, it's a change from your norm. You know, you're not going out the door to work for 8 hours a day. You're, like Georgie said, I feel for a lot of people who are having to juggle full-time work and children, you know, hats off to them people. That's really impressive, but that will definitely come with its own stresses and trials and tribulations. So that will definitely have an impact. So we felt we had to sort of give people, you know, that sort of reassurance that hopefully things will settle down once they become adjusted to this new norm.
What would you say are kind of the biggest lessons through everything that you guys have been doing that you've learned? If you could give people just a couple of bits of key information that they must know, what would it be?
For me, it's always been the role of good nutrition for the menstrual cycle. I think a lot of young females get into bad habits, you know, through one means or another, or they might have lost weight because they've increased training load and not increased calorie intake at the same time. I think for me, I always sort of, you know, through sharing my own story, but always reiterate that, you know, at the end of the day, more food is more energy. If you've got more energy, you're going to run faster, you're going to cycle faster, you can sprint quicker. It's energy at the end of the day. And if you are highly active, there's no need to be restricting calorie intake or reducing certain things. If you eat in good moderation, good carbs, fats, proteins, and not restricting yourself in any way, then that's sort of the best platform that you can give yourself for long term in the sport, but also good health for beyond sport, which I think sometimes we as athletes tend to forget that there is a life beyond running, for example, or beyond whatever sport it is, and that will be really important. But it's important to realise that earlier on than when it's a bit too late. So for me, I always, you know, I wish that someone had said to me years ago, like, okay, let's take 6 months out of sport. You're 16 years old. What does it actually really matter when you're 16? Like, take some time back away from the sport a little bit, not taking the time out totally, but get those cycles sorted, make sure your nutrition's on point, and then we'll come back. And you could have been to, you know, two Olympics by now, but that obviously hindsight's a wonderful thing. But that's what I say to people: short term changes when you're younger can have sort of massive benefits in terms of your longevity in the sport, and also just having that good relationship with food throughout is key for me.
I think for me, so as a kid, I was just so embarrassed about periods. Like, I started my periods really young. I was in junior school. I was obsessed with sport, but for me, it was like a massive paranoia. And I think probably between the age of like 10 and 14, it totally preoccupied my mind. Like, I had a section in my bag that was where I kept all of my sanitary products, and like I wouldn't touch it because to me that was like, oh, that's disgusting, until I had to. And I didn't tell any of my friends that I was like, I'd started my period. There was like a massive shame factor, and I really want to I guess help the next generation, like the up and coming girls now, to understand that actually, like, it's not something that you should be really shamed about. And also, yes, there's a period, but the menstrual cycle is a whole process, and you know, hormones are constantly changing, and for women it's a really unique aspect of their physiology which they can be proactive around. And you know, like, if we can help girls from a young age, like, bust those myths and get them communicating, then I just think, as Jess said, that's going to prepare them for their long-term life and health. Alongside that, getting them to track their cycles so they are prepared. Like, again, I think a massive anxiety of mine was I never knew when it was going to come, so I was always like, oh my gosh, is it going to come when I'm running or when I'm playing a match? Like, and that was just a constant internal anxiety. And I think if we can help manage that would really help. And so, yeah, tracking symptoms, I think the more you can do that and take the ownership of it. The other thing I would say, like, the importance of nutrition, 100%, bad nutrition as well. So like eating foods that are like, I see massive correlations between people who say they have horrendous symptoms and they have horrendous dietary habits. And so you think, like, actually you just need to eating a healthy, balanced diet, like, that is not overrated. Like, the more you can, like, educate youngsters that this is, like, these are the best practices around eating for women, eating for exercise, and just generally eating, I think the better. And my final one is the impact of psychological stress. Again, like, for me right now, the number of people who are getting in touch and saying my period's all over the place, my symptoms are so bad, and that causes anxiety, which adds to the existent anxiety, be it internal anxiety, as Jess was saying, or be it really blatantly obvious anxiety. But it's just like levels of heightened anxiety are just causing mental dysfunction or more symptoms all over the place.
Yeah, and I don't really have anything to add to what Jess and Georgie have said, but I think it's just general as well, just disrupting the status quo, just just starting to bang the drum a bit more about what women experience and how normal it is. And I think everyone forgets that we're half the population, so we're just entitled to talk about it as men. Men are entitled to talk about their bodies. And I just think it's just about making it a bit more normal to talk about the stuff that isn't normal to talk about at the moment.
And we also do talk about women in sport and articles and things in general, don't we? We try to at the start of each episode, which I think is good to sort of draw attention to as well. And like Lucy has quite a lot of knowledge in that area. And I think when the girls were playing at Twickenham, wasn't it? You said they had like an amazing sort of attendance. So things like that, just reiterating through our sort of platform, might go to someone who doesn't realise that and thinks, oh yeah, that's cool, and like, okay, I'll tune into this women's rugby match that's coming on next week or something. So at the same time, we can hopefully promote just women's sport in general too.
Yeah, definitely.
And obviously it's the Female Athlete podcast, but not just for females to listen to. And I guess it's, it's giving that information accessible for men as well, if they are interested and they want to understand what's going on with their, their partners, their sisters, or their club mates, and anyone to get a better understanding.
100%. And we've been talking about doing a coach edition as well. I've done some podcasts in the past specifically aimed at like the male demographic or male coaching demographic, because I actually really feel for male coaches when they're coaching like pubertal girls, or even just like post-pubertal women and menopausal women, because they're often the people who really want to learn, and they're coming to us and saying like, can you give me some education? Like, I'm not a woman, I don't know how it works. And actually, like, I think the more we can empower them with this understanding, the better. And the more they're gonna, I don't know, be able to have that discussion too.
Yeah, I think it goes back as well to like grassroots sport as well. So a lot of club athletes, we obviously come from an athletics background, but I'm sure it's the same in all kinds of sports, that everybody starts at some kind of, club or school or something like that introduces them to the sport, and they're often supported and carry on through volunteers, and they happen, more often happen to be males. So if we can just help educate them a little bit on what might be going through with their athletes, they might not have to read into, poor performances once every month or something for an athlete, or if someone's not turning up to training at certain, regular intervals throughout the month, perhaps that's a question that's worth asking to the parents, for example, or family members. But I think it provides them with an additional level of knowledge, or an area which they could go to if they wanted to learn more.
Thank you. And I guess finally, I just wondered if you wouldn't mind sharing a bit of insight into your own running journeys as well, because obviously you're all having different journeys at the moment. And I know, Lucy, you said that you were planning to run the marathon later on this year as well. So how are you all kind of dealing with the current situation and just taking everything into account? How has it affected your own running?
Well, for me, obviously it's all been a bit strange. So the end of last year was fabulous. I ran like my 2:25 in Florence, and going into 2020, it was sort of big goals on the horizon in terms of the Olympics. But then I think 1 week it was London Marathon was cancelled, but we were still going to have like a closed trial. So you had to you carried on training. But then as the news sort of evolved over the next few days, it was like, is this really going to happen? It seems really unlikely. And to run an event, I know that you need medical support for first off, never mind like your coaches and things. You have to have a St. John's ambulance or whoever there. And if we were just running a 5K loop, you're going to have at least 2 people on that loop. And that's not feasible at the minute. They're needed elsewhere. And when it came out that we weren't having a trials, it wasn't really surprising. And then when the Olympics got postponed, it was a little bit of, I say, relief, because you don't want to put yourself at risk by doing sort of hard, strenuous training during a time where you need a really good immune system. But also, I'm not sure how I would have felt, celebrating a massive sporting event when there's so much going wrong across the globe. It just didn't seem right to sort of slot that in as if nothing was going on. I think it's appropriate that it's now postponed and people can just focus on their families and everyone's staying well and just managing what they can with work and things. But for me, I think we're just going back to like basics, really, sort of wiping the slate clean from the training that we were doing before and just starting again, really, but taking our time, building up slowly, because there's definitely no rush for anything, and just playing it safe, really, you know, especially now we've got no access to physios and things at the minute. I Skype my physio every week, but obviously it's not the same as getting treatment, so just erring on the side of caution with everything, really, and just trying to take a day at a time. I think some weeks can be hard, some weeks can be easy in terms of mental resilience to it all, but just trying to take a day at a time, really, and just it will happen. Whatever happens will happen, won't it, in terms of COVID and things like that, and we'll just take it as it comes.
Yeah, I guess so. My last few years of running wise have been challenging, I guess, in a way. I think after I finished my PhD, my body, like literally as I've just been talking about stress, I think my body just like managing my way through my PhD and let me run whenever I wanted to run, and everything was all fine. I think as I finished my PhD, my like neural system seemed to react in a very strange way. Got very weird sensations, like loss of feeling in my legs, in my arms. I had to have like a whole range of tests just to try and work out what was going on. My physio, Mark Buckingham, has been absolutely amazing, like helping me just like work out what has been going on. And I think I'm now at a place where I just like, I love running. I am such a running geek. I just love running. And I think for me at the moment, it's just a question of like working with my coach to just build up. And like, as Jess said, there's no rush. There's nothing to aim for right now. Like I feel I sit at my desk all day and just long for the minute I can go out of the door and go for a run and get some headspace. And at the moment, my running is like totally my time, and that's for me, like work for us is busier than ever, and I'm definitely a Zoom super user, so I feel like the moment I can just get out of the door and just get some headspace, go and train, and you know what, whatever my watch says, like I live in the countryside where it's really hilly, so I can't be obsessed by pace. I can't be obsessed by doing X session in the perfect place. Like I've just got to roll with it. And I think actually that's been such a lesson for me. Like I'm not running to a bar like certain sessions. I just run to the stopwatch, and I don't care what the pace is. I'm just thinking like, actually, I just want to feel good right now. And similarly to as Jess said, like we don't have access to physios, we don't have access to like our gym. So I've got my little gym circuit I do at home. Zoom my physio on a regular basis, and just like, I guess I'm feeling like I'm using this time as like my running is my happy place, and that's my escapism almost.
And well, I'm coming at it from obviously a very sub-elite level, but I got into the marathon world very recently. I did the Paris Marathon last year, my first ever one. Trained for it, really enjoyed it, and my time, I think I did it in 4:20, and I wasn't very happy with that. I was trying to get under 4 hours, and so I just said, right, I'm doing another marathon, and I signed up, like I said, to do the Dublin one in October. So 6 months away, but I've sort of started edging back into shorter runs and doing a bit of sprint training when I can now without a treadmill, which is a little harder. But so I'm just embarking on that now. But I'd say as well, definitely training for the last marathon, my body wasn't used to the amount of running. So I've got tendinitis in my hamstring, and went to the physio. So every day I'm doing my strengthening exercises now. So it's kind of like a full-time job, just going. So especially now approaching 30, so it's like you definitely see that you don't feel like you're obviously like a teenager or 20 years old anymore. I feel you definitely I need to warm up for at least 45 minutes before I embark on any sort of run anymore, which I never used to have to do, which is just a sad reality, really. But yes, I am enjoying it, but I think the motivation during the lockdown is a little bit harder once you're kind of indoors and you get to 6 o'clock after a working day and you just think, oh, I don't really want to go and have to do like an hour's run, but you always feel better once you do it. So
I feel like I'm like queuing up at the door, like trying to put my laptop away with Zoom on.
Yeah, I like to get mine done in the morning, and then I have no excuses.
Well, thank you all ever so much. I'm so grateful for that insight. I mean, is there anything that we haven't chatted about that is important to know, or have we pretty much covered everything?
I'm happy, but Lucy, did you have anything you wanted to?
Yeah, I was just going to promote our social channels really, but I think everything else is covered. Like I said, our kind of mantra is, what was it? Breaking down the taboos and opening up the conversation. So, and helping women learn more about their bodies. But I'm aware that obviously we don't want to just pigeonhole women. We want to have males learn about what we're talking about as well and have an awareness.